That was Columbia University biostatistics professor Melanie Wall. And that does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is currently accepting applications for a director of technology to lead our broadcast, digital, and IT operations. You can learn more and apply at democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, with Juan Gonzalez for another edition of Democracy Now!
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
Hi, this is Al McFarland, host of The Conversation with Al McFarland. You're listening to 90.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis. I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarland. Today, this week, editions live from George Floyd Square. We're operating today, presenting the program today from the World Outreach for Christ Church at 3808 Chicago Avenue in South Minneapolis. If you're in the neighborhood, drop by. We want you to tell people, too, that we're having this conversation. This is an important conversation. We're thinking about, reflecting on, and imagining what the world can be, all impacted by the experience of the murder of George Floyd. Right outside where we're sitting right now is where the deal went down. Minneapolis police officers apprehending a person allegedly for passing counterfeit money. That encounter viewed by the entire world, the entire planet, everybody affected, and it affects how we operate today in the world. There was a moment that we thought change was afoot. Well, I can tell you that right now, people are wondering whether the change we imagined is change that is under assault in a way that's aggressive and more persistent than ever. The question is, will the resilience we've always shown emerge, continue to grow? Are we able to build a future that reflects the justice, the liberation, the peace that we need as a community? That's the conversation today. I've got friends, experts, people in community who are nation builders, community builders, people that are passionate about making our community work. Before I start, I want to say a special thanks to our partners here. We're streaming this program live on social media platforms, including the Facebook and YouTube channels of the Black Press of America and Insight News. We're also broadcasting, as you know, live here on KFAI. We're also broadcasting live on television in St. Paul and Minneapolis. In St. Paul, it's with the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, SPNN, and in Minneapolis, Speak Minneapolis. We thank them. Finally, we are especially pleased to be connected with an organization called Nubia. I'm sporting the look for Narrative, and if you're not familiar with Narrative, check it out. It's a community that is global, it's online, and its mission is freedom for our people. So check it out, you'll be impressed. I also want to give a special thanks to the sponsors, companies and agencies that stepped up to support this. Among them, the McKnight Foundation, the Minnesota Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage, also the First Independence Bank. It's a Black-owned bank right here in this neighborhood, the Minnesota Humanity Center, and Kowalski's Markets, other sponsors to be announced in the future. Well, let me begin. Oh, first, if you, Haley coming around that way, sorry, okay. One of our guests arrived that I'll introduce you to as well. You know, I want you to share, if you're on social media, let people know that you're here, send a text out, a tweet out, and invite them to join, like the program, and if you're not a subscriber, subscribe to Insight at YouTube. Well, let me begin by introducing my first guest, and that's former state representative and now the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood for North Central States, and it's Ruth Richardson. Ruth, welcome to the conversation. So good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. And I'm particularly interested in your story, where you were. I'm asking all my guests this. Where were you when you got the news of the murder, the death of George Floyd? And what things did you go through as an individual, but as a legislator as well?
So when I got the news of George Floyd's murder, I was actually at my house. I was sitting on my couch, and I was on social media when I saw the video that had been uplifted to social media. And in that moment, it was trauma on trauma. I know that the murder of George Floyd caught the nation's attention, but I was sitting and reflecting on the fact of all the names of people who came before George Floyd that didn't catch national attention. And I was thinking of my own family member, my cousin, who was shot in the back by law enforcement in front of my mother. And there was no video of that encounter.
Tell that story. Let's hear that. What happened and when and where, if you don't mind reliving that.
Yeah, so my cousin was 19 years old. And my mom was actually at his grandmother's house at the time, at their apartment over on the east side. And she was coming out of the apartment because she was heading from her sister's house to her vehicle when she saw my cousin, who was running for his life prior to being shot in his back. After he was shot, people were told to get back into their apartments and not to come out. And, you know, some of the pieces of what happened next were a little difficult to piece apart, but we know that he ended up being carried to an ambulance by his hands and feet and ultimately died at Regions Hospital. When we went down to Regions, the reception that we received was not one that you would expect for a grieving family to receive, and we were ultimately told to leave. We were told to leave the hospital, but we were in this sort of space of where you have this really intense loss, and there was no catching of anyone's imagination or attention. So there was a heaviness that was coming into this moment, and I think for a lot of people it was eye-opening. But for people who had been living and understanding this, it's nothing new.
When did this happen? When was it?
It was in the 90s. It was
In the 90s,
yeah.
before you became a political?
Before I became a political, before I had.
So how did that affect you and affect your decision to move into the arena of policy making, of lawmaking? And what have you done as a lawmaker to, in a sense, work out the trauma and the experience?
Well, trauma's still there, but what I would say is that I'm an accidental politician. I'm not a person who was like, you know what I'm going to do one day is run for office. That was not anything that I had ever thought about doing previously. And then getting into the space, because I was an accidental politician, my approach to legislating was probably different than people who wanted this as a goal. What it meant was oftentimes I was writing my own bills with community, as opposed to relying on lobbyists to write bills, bringing voices to the Capitol that had not previously been elevated at the Capitol. And in that moment, when I was thinking about the morning that I heard about George Floyd, it was during COVID. And everything at the Capitol had stopped because of COVID, because when 2 people died, there was an emergency situation. And I remember very clearly that in a divided legislature, that there was agreement that the only bills that we were going to work on were going to be related to COVID because it was a public health crisis and 2 people had died. And I was reflecting on the fact that people who look like me have been dying for centuries in this nation, and never at a legislature have we stopped and said, people are dying. This is a public health crisis. We need to do something. And it was in that moment that I decided to draft House Resolution number 1 declaring racism a public health crisis.
Amazing. Wayne, what about it?
Was that?
Now, if we can just get through this weekend with no drama, no drama. If we could just make it through one weekend with no drama, no drama. That's what we need. I'm tired of begging, please. That's what we love. This is our gift from above. Let's just make it through one weekend.
There we go. You know, it's George Floyd week here in Minnesota. We're broadcasting live from George Floyd Square. We're at the World Outreach for Christ Church at 3808 Chicago Avenue South, and we are grateful for Pastor Curtis Farrar, for allowing us to convene here, this sacred space to talk about a critical issue and to reflect on the 5th year. Yesterday I mentioned that I heard new language, that the community here is calling it not the anniversary, but the angelversary. So the redefining what it means and what the experience is, defining it in language that supports and reflects our dignity and our connection with creation and the Creator, an angelversary. I want to stick with the vibe here now and bring in voices of other great women. And I have 2 on stage right now. One is joining us remotely from Texas, I believe. Coach Leah, can we bring Coach Leah in? And let's see if we're working our technology. Coach Leah, how you doing? Okay, and are you muted? Because we're not hearing you yet. Not hearing your voice yet. We'll come back to you and we'll work that out if there's a mute issue there. But who's here on stage with me at the World Outreach for Christ Church is Haley Taylor Schlitz. She's an assistant attorney general for the state of Minnesota. She's also a columnist for Inside News. She happens to hold the distinction of being, I believe, the youngest black woman to ever receive her law degree. She's in her early 20s. She's a lawyer. She's been a teacher already, and she is an attorney general, an assistant attorney general. Haley, good afternoon. Welcome, and thank you for all that you do.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
So the question I want to start with is, where were you? And what has the George Floyd incident, how has it impacted your life? What are your thoughts?
As I heard other panelists speaking, I really resonated with what was said. I was 17 and in law school when I heard about the murder of George Floyd. And for me, it really hit close to home because this was weeks after the Rodney King civil unrest, where my mother's father died. He was the second person murdered in the civil unrest when she was just 18. And so with this being weeks apart, it was just a heavy reminder and trauma on trauma, as was said before, about the violence and delayed justice. His case is still unsolved. The delayed injustice of the situations at hand and the racial violence that we're seeing. And a lot of names that came before him also rang in my mind between my grandfather and George Floyd. Amongst them being Trayvon Martin in 2012, Sandra Bland, who was my soror, in 2015, and Tatiana Jefferson in 2019, which was in my hometown in Fort Worth, and then George Floyd just a year later. It was very heavy. We were already, of course, mourning the anniversary of my grandfather, and then with this happening, I think my grandfather's murder was 33 years ago now. And
tell that story. Let's stop there. Tell that story. Let's make this.
No, I appreciate that moment because he was on his way to the grocery store getting groceries for his family. And like I said, my mother was only 18, just a high school senior, when the Rodney King civil unrest sparked. And little did my mother know that her father was not coming home that evening. And that would be the last time she saw him was the last time that she would see him. He wasn't there for her high school graduation, for her college graduation, her medical school graduation. I never met him. So things like that have really made a lasting impact on my mother and me and our entire family. And, like I said, the fact that it was 33 years ago now, but there has not been 33 years of progress. When George Floyd was murdered and the worldwide protests that sparked because of it, and not just because of his murder, but like I said, the murders that came before that really resonated. The weight of that, the sting and bruise of that was felt by my family, just like it was for all people of color and all people who need and seek justice, racial justice, human rights and justice. It was felt worldwide, and it was particularly felt by my family as this was weeks after the anniversary of my grandfather's death, a murder.
What is your work as an assistant attorney general? What kinds of things are you working on, and how did you decide to make your way to Minnesota? How did you get here?
I'm currently in the Department of Public Safety, so I feel this is very timely for my division, but also the Attorney General's office and obviously Minnesota as a whole. This is very timely. We work with police departments across the state, and it's just I get to see, having come up here from Texas for the job, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to work with Attorney General Keith Ellison. It really has been incredible to work on the ground, boots on the ground, on the literal streets of Minnesota, the entire state, just really getting to work hands-on with this area and this realm of public safety in Minnesota.
The question I'll ask you to speak on behalf of your generation: how do we move towards freedom? How do we take these crises, this trauma, and use that as fuel to seek and attain liberation for our people? What is liberation? And is liberation for our people, is it a threat to other people?
I think the definition of liberation is constantly something that changes. I think a fallacy oftentimes that we get in is that there's going to be one law or one definition or one thing that can truly just fix the problems that we're seeing. It's ever changing as America and the demographics is ever changing. I definitely do not think liberation is a threat to other people, or freedom or equality is a threat to others' freedom or equality or justice. But in the realm of my generation, which I really appreciate you directing that to me, because I really do think I can provide some insight on that. I think that there was also, I think that maybe our parents, because President Barack Obama was elected in 2008, I think with that election came a lot of comfort and excitement and joy about perhaps what we're learning in history books is truly now history, and there's going to be better for our children. And I really think these incidents of hate and racism, such as George Floyd's murder and others before and after him that didn't get news coverage, really are a bucket of cold water that oftentimes, as a former history teacher myself, there was a whole unit that we had on modern events, and it was not that different from what we had learned in the civil rights movement. It was not that different from what we had learned 50, 100, 200 years ago. It's not history books. It's living history. It's our real lives, day-to-day real lives. And I think that part of that is my generation is growing up in this day and age. in this day and age where we, on one hand, our first knowledge of what a president was Barack Obama, but then also as we come of age and most of us are still not able to vote, we have the Trump administration. We have hope and we see the hope in our parents' eyes, but then we also are living during a time where George Floyd was murdered. It went from being lynched to being choked. It's not that different. We have not made as much progress. Like I said, there's been 33 years since my grandfather was murdered, but not 33 years of progress. And I think that my generation is really coming of age right now and feeling and seeing that and feeling that urgency and seeing the local work, which I'm sure we'll get into, and the national work, the laws and things that have changed that there has been progress, but how much more work there still is left, and my generation's feeling that.
I'm Al McFarland. This is The Conversation with Al McFarland. We're broadcasting live from South Minneapolis. We're in George Floyd Square. We've called this George Floyd Week. We're celebrating the Angelversary. I think this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, 25th is the date that we mark the murder of George Floyd. And we are contemplating, reflecting what that particular specific incident meant and means, and how does it guide us, fuel us towards our daily living, our bid for freedom as individuals, as families, as community? How do we change humanity based on our knowledge? And how does that incorporate all of our personal family memories and stories? It's all connected. We have to testify. We have to tell ourselves and tell the world that our voices and our visions matter. That's what we're doing here today. And we thank you for listening on KFAI. For our friends in Nubia and Narrative, thank you for the work that you do. Thanks to all who are connected to us through Facebook and through YouTube, through LinkedIn and the other social media platforms. We want to keep the connection going and growing. It's important that we talk and say what's on our mind. Ruth, I want to come back to you real quickly to have you respond to Haley. What thoughts came to your mind as she was sharing?
I think one of the thoughts that comes to mind is how far we really have to go in this state, in this country, to live up to the promise of this country as well. And in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, there were a lot of promises that were made. There were corporate promises that were made that we see are rolling back right now. There were a number of bills that were passed, and what I appreciated about Haley's comment is one bill, a collection of bills, are not going to completely change the trajectory. They are steps forward. And even the bills that there was a police reform package that was passed in July of 2020 that were a lot of really important first steps, but that's what they were. They were first steps. The bans on chokeholds, banning of warrior training, autism and mental health training, thinking about residency requirements for law enforcement. And the residency requirement was one that stuck with me a little bit, because when I recognized that George Floyd also knew Derek Chauvin, I was like, will that residency requirement really change anything? Because they worked at the same bar.
Mm-hmm.
And there were other bills that were passed, and with the passing of House Resolution Number 1, declaring racism a public health crisis, we created the House Select Committee on Racial Justice. And as a freshman, I co-chaired that committee, and we went out to community and we asked community to really talk about, in this space, what does community need, as opposed to saying, here, community, take this thing that we're offering you. And there were 83 community-driven recommendations that came forward as a result of that work. And it's a living blueprint where some of those things have come to be. But I think as Haley talked through, how much farther along would we have been if, when her grandfather lost his life, there was this commitment. And we can go even further back, because again, When we think about what we're talking about, what is old is new again. And I think about Emmett Till, for example, and we had legislation around Emmett Till that passed in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder that was focused on mental health of surviving family members and knowing how important that is. And it took almost 100 years to get the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act passed after his death. And I think that that's an important reminder about what happens when there is an inability to see the humanity of people.
Is Coach Leah available? Let's see if she can come back in. Yeah. Coach Leah, can we see if we can hear you now? How are you?
Hi, everybody.
Good. We hear you loudly and clearly. Coach Leah, as I said, is one of our editors at Insight News, but she's an entrepreneur, a mentor, and just an all-around great human being. Coach, thank you for being here and for all you do in community. This is on George Floyd. You are from this neighborhood as well. This is your home. Talk about what the George Floyd incident means to you. Where were you when you got the news, and what happened in the days that followed? What were your impressions with the uprising that occurred after the murder of George Floyd?
Yeah, so I was working with Houston Responds, and we were literally doing a drive called Masks for All because it was during the pandemic, and we were providing masks free to the community through our outreach efforts. And just like everybody else, I saw the footage of this dear brother being killed live. And the irony of all of that is that I have made my home here in Houston, my primary home base, in Third Ward, the same place where he was pretty much raised, where George Floyd was raised. And where he lost his life was 600 feet away from the daycare that I used to attend as a child. And South Minneapolis is my old stomping grounds. And just to see the footage, and then I also had that additional vantage point of being from that community, growing up at 40th in Portland Avenue, attending Park Avenue Methodist Church youth programs, attending Bancroft Elementary School, attending Northrop Elementary School, going to Phelps Park every day for recreation, and where I first learned how to speed skate on ice and play basketball. And so it was a lot. It was a lot. And I realized at that moment that I had an obligation to sit with the feelings and then also do my due diligence as, from where I was. And I remember speaking quite often with Jeff Hayden, who was in service to the state as an elected official at the time, and just talking about, hey, what can we do here? And there were several people that I was engaged with through the Masks for All project that wanted to, donate and, just what can we do? It was the sentiment here in Houston. And so, I still feel, and I don't want to say the collective community trauma from the incident, but I know, and I was listening yesterday to the broadcast, and that rage that the gentleman was talking about was something that I felt, and it just reminded me of the subtle racism that I faced growing up there, and didn't realize it, didn't have language for it actually until after I moved away. And so, with that being said, I would just love to hear what in the community what can we do in, with our platforms at this stage? Because I've heard that there's been very little that has been sustained, and we have the opportunity to implement things that will that will help, make change, that will be impactful. And the time is now. We can't wait. This is the age anniversary, 5-year age anniversary, and the time is now.
Thank you, Coach Leah. Let's continue. I want to bring that question to the fore with my next guest, and that is Thomas Berry. He's the vice chair, I think, or vice president of the Minneapolis NAACP. Thomas Berry, welcome to the program. Good to see you again, as always.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah. So talk about what can the community do? What is the community doing? What have we done? What must we do?
So the first thing I'm going to say is that we have to recognize George Floyd was a black heterosexual. And I know a lot of people have had a lot of things to say about the situation, but black men have been locked out of this situation, George Floyd. And we know it. Like, you're talking to a black male who was accused of attempted murder of a cop when I was 17 years old, and the cops beat me. They also accused me of robbing a bank in my hometown, and they found there was 3 white guys who'd done it. When I was 12 years old, the police raided my home and put guns inside of my underwear and my son's underwear. So that is the relationship for black men in this country with law enforcement. Now, it pains me that any time one of us die, everybody else rushes to the forefront without understanding our relationship with police, right? And that's what the pain is. You want to know why change didn't take place? It's because you can't get change if the people who are experiencing the abuse is not a part of the remedy. You can't lock us out. Nobody speaks better for us than us. I know that brother called out for his mother, but there's still brothers that are here who experienced it. And so, to me, I don't think nothing's going to change. Because what happens always with oppression is that if you got 2 groups, and one group is going to cause you less, you're going to deal with the people that's going to ask you for less change. So those dollars came in. Those dollars didn't come to change anything structural. As a matter of fact, we saw things that were being paid for when they kept on saying, we're putting money towards Trump. But how do you measure the outcomes of no more Trump?
So what do you mean by that? You're speaking generally. Are there specifics about money? What are you talking about?
I can talk specifics.
Okay, there we go.
I can talk specifics because typically before George Floyd.
And then hold it, before you do, when we do a music break in a minute, I have another guest in the audience. I want you to come to the end spot here in a few minutes, okay? We'll figure out how to get you up here without being on camera. Hang on, so go ahead.
All right, so with that being said, what I'm saying is in our community, George Floyd died over $20 that they said was a false. So that's a social economic problem. The social economic disparities in the state of Minnesota has not changed since all those dollars came into our community. That money came in, people started putting it towards environmental justice, folks started putting money towards sabbatical, they started putting money towards everything else except those racial disparities. And once again, it was not black men who were in charge of those organizations that were getting those dollars. Black men were almost froze out immediately. We talked about, even right after Philando Castile died, the conversation went from Philando Castile to transgender violence. And people talked about it, the city council was shaped by it. Nothing had anything to do with black males being violated by the system. Now, in our community, we are a law and justice community. I don't want people to believe that black folks are a fan of lawlessness. We believe in justice. However, we also understand that there is a problem with law enforcement. And let's keep this in mind too, real quick, that George Floyd happened under the watch of a black police chief.
Mm-hmm.
Today we have a black sheriff and DeWanna Witt who is doing things similar to what was going on before then with a warrant suppression team. They're shaking brothers down. So that lets you know that the lesson has not been passed on from 5 years ago. And it does not mean because you got black faces in high places you're going to get change. The change has to come when you start really listening to the community and the people who are victims of this oppression. It can't come from the people that are looking at us being oppressed. It has to come from the people who are actually oppressed. In the audience right there, you got Al Flowers. He was beat by the police inside of his home in front of his children. That type of embarrassment has happened to black men since the plantation all the way till now. And we have not addressed that. As a matter of fact, we've undressed black men and we've left us at the outside looking in as everybody else has gotten their comeuppance except us.
So what does addressing it mean? How should it be addressed? How can it be addressed? What's the future?
Well, the first thing you have to listen to is you have to talk to us. And I think our focus typically is always.
So are you asking them to listen? I raised the question because at some point in time, it's whether they listen or not, what we gonna do. And what we gonna do should not depend on them, from my point of view.
Well, I hear that, but we always say that when it comes to us, but we watch everybody else get all the resources. So I don't want to say that about black men and watch every other group get resourced out so that they can get their comeuppance. We putting taxes in too. Now, we are taxpayers, so we should get the same representation for the taxation that we get. The other thing too, we're not begging nobody to do anything. As a matter of fact, we're asking everyone else to get out of the way and act as they're representing us. When this sister gave those names, she left out Mike Brown, she left out Freddie Gray, she left out Tamir Rice, she left out a lot of black men who have been shot down and black boys who have been shot down in cold blood. And what I'm telling to you is that no, we're not asking anyone, but when we talk, it comes from a place of radicalness. That's why the resources did not come to us. That's why you won't get the change.
And how will you change that? What will you do?
If you're asking me,
I'm asking you.
I'm always believing of, self-determination. So I'm always believing that you build from within, but at the same time, you have to speak truth to power. We can't sit up and lie. I mean, it's a 5-year, we're calling it an anniversary. George Floyd did not donate his life to a cause. His life was taken. And you cannot crouch it with all of these nice terms. So as a black man, we have to speak up and speak loud and don't let people mute our voice. These things that are cute, that make other people feel good for the oppression of us, we gotta kick them towers down, and we gotta start speaking truth to power. We gotta rip that Band-Aid off.
Wayne, let's do a break. And while we're doing that, Alberta, why don't you come up and take a seat on the end here. Wayne?
We are soldiers in God's army. We got to fight, though we have to die. We got to hold on, oh Lord, stay down. We got to hold it till we die. My mother was a soldier. She had her hands on the freedom plow. One day she got so old, she could not fight anymore. She had to stand there and fight on anyhow. I'm a soldier in God's army. We've got to fight, although we'll have to die. We've got to hold it up, blood's rain man. We've got to hold it up till we die.
Wayne McFarland and Ryan Listman. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Ryan. I'm Al McFarland. This is The Conversation with Al McFarland. We're broadcasting live from George Floyd Square. We're calling this George Floyd Week. Obviously, the city, the country, the world are marking the anniversary of the death, the anniversary of the death of George Floyd. That comes up on the 25th this weekend. This program, we're calling it Amplified Voices, brought to you by The Conversation with Al McFarland. We thank KFAI for allowing us to do a series of interviews all week long. We started yesterday. Today is our regular broadcast time, but they've also allowed us to have a convening Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday all week long, George Floyd Week. So we want to invite you to tune in. If you want to, show up. The two things we're going to do to finish up today, we're going to have Justin Terrell, who's with the Minnesota Justice Research Center, put a cap on this conversation in a minute. Before that, I want to introduce Alberta Gillespie, who is an activist in the community. Alberta, introduce yourself, first of all. Thank you for being here.
I think that's a great introduction, so not much more to say than that, and thank you for having me. I'm glad to sit with all of these esteemed people. I think I know all of them, except this might be my first time meeting you, and so thank you for having me.
Your work, what are you doing now?
So I'm doing what I've always done, fighting for community in the various ways in which I do that. So if there's a wrong that needs to be righted, I'm out there trying to right that wrong.
And where have you worked?
So you probably are referring to, I did work as a civil rights director for the city of Minneapolis.
That's what I'm talking about.
That I had that position. Yes, I did.
Okay. And so in the context of this conversation, George Floyd, what are your thoughts? What are your experiences? What learnings can you share with us?
Oh, gosh, there's so many. Thank you for that question. There's so many. I know you asked your guests, like, where were they when this happened? And I thought about that for myself. Where was I when this happened? And I remember going to bed, looking at this video on social media, and not quite comprehending what I was seeing. My mind could not wrap itself around what I saw, and I thought, is this some kind of joke or what is this? And then I woke up the next day to the headlines that all of you did, and I saw how Mr. Floyd had been murdered. And also, as a person,
What did you
yes.
expect our community and our government to do? What did you expect the police department to do after that? What was your thinking would likely happen?
I think so I hear what you said. What did I expect them to do, and what I hoped for? Those are two different things.
What did you expect, first
So
of
I
all?
expected them to do just what they did, which was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what they did. And actually what they did is that if you remember the headline or the what was actually written, it said a man died from a medical incident.
Yes.
It was a lie. Yeah. And I will call it just that because that's what it was.
And you expected them to lie.
Well, based on history, if you know anything about America, and it was a lie. And so that is the cover up ensued. And then the attacks on the character of Mr. Floyd started. And so there was a continuous attempt to try to portray him as someone who asked for what happened to him. And we've seen it happen over and over again with numerous people. I'm running away, you shoot me in the back, but it's still somehow my fault, right? And so the lies ensued. And then if you all remember the original footage, it looked like it was just that one person kneeling on his neck. When I saw the image of the 3 people on his body, and the other person the other police officer keeping people from approaching, and the people saying, "You're killing him."
Mm-hmm.
I think that changed me in a way because we've seen it, like as Brother Barry said, we've seen that story play over and over in other places, and for this time we said it's right here. Mm-hmm. Even though we had Mr. Still, this is right here, and you have the people saying, "You're killing him." And you continue with that process.
Let me turn to Justin Terrell. Thank you, Justin. So what's the environment now? You doing the research, Minnesota Justice Research Center. Tell about the organization, what kind of work you're doing, and put that in the context of George Floyd. In part, your work comes out of George Floyd, I think. Am I correct or not?
Well, I think anytime you're working on justice issues in Minnesota, there's a connection to this. Our history is a little bit older than that. But the Minnesota Justice Research Center, we're a small nonprofit. We office out of Sabathani, just up the block from here. Our mission is to transform the criminal legal system through research, education, and policy development. What that means is we like to dig in on issues and do the research. We like to bring people together to learn from each other through popular education. We host a conference every year. And then as far as policy development goes, we'd like to give people policy proposals. We like to develop policy proposals with community members so that they actually have something they can take action on, something that is tangible that people can mobilize around. And recently we've had some great successes. I just learned today that our efforts to support voter outreach for formerly incarcerated folks increased voter turnout by 20% in the last statewide election, with 6,000 formerly incarcerated people voting. And that's shout out to Tone Up, shout out to all the folks who worked with on that project. Obviously last week the announcement of the closing of Stillwater, while we maintain very concerned about the residents and the workers there, we know that facility is a 100 years old facility and a 100-year-old dead idea. And so we need to reimagine what incarceration looks like in the state. And fortunately, the list goes on, but we don't have enough time to talk about all the different ways we've worked with community members to try to take our criminal legal system and actually make it a justice system, which is the outcome that we're looking for. I'm just gonna share a couple of things that I think are helpful to try to. I don't know if I can put a cap on this conversation, Al, but I appreciate the space and I love the vibes. This is an amazing vibe in here today. Some things I want to encourage people to remember is 5 years after the murder of George Floyd, we talk about, has things changed? Has anything happened? And I want to just, invite a more mature gaze at that question. Of course, things have changed. Of course, things have happened. Have we solved racism in America? Absolutely not. Have we eliminated the opportunity for officers to continue their tradition of terrorizing Black folks? Absolutely not. And we have changed. If we haven't changed as a community, then that would be almost as tragic as the loss of another life. Because as a community, we need to continue to grow and learn and get stronger to advocate for justice. And so I'm gonna point out a couple things that have happened, and I'm gonna make a real clear point. So first of all, the conviction of Derek Chauvin and the officers involved in the murder of George Floyd is often glazed over, and we should never hesitate to go back and watch the clinic that our AG put on. And so that right there is something that is a case study that for the history books, and that we should always honor that that case was tried while thousands of people were in the streets demanding justice. If we can't claim that as an experience worth digesting and growing through, and recognize that we are different and have changed on the other side of that, then I think we are letting ourselves down. The other thing that I want to
Before you move from there, what's happening right now in the country is the discussion of whether your president will pardon Derek Chauvin. Talk about that. I know it's not going to happen. He may do it, but what happens?
Let's talk about how great the conviction that A.G. Ellison landed was. Is that if you pardon Derek Chauvin in the federal system, well, he just got to come home and do his state time. And it's a good thing we're closing Stillwater, because he didn't want to go to an aging facility that's falling apart like that. So they're going to have to find another place for him. So the administration can do their best, and I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will try to troll us with a pardon. But the reality
why would they do that?
I can't talk about politics. I'm nonprofit, brother. But here's what I'll say. Here's what I'll say to that. It is not a new tactic by this administration or other administrations to troll Black folks, to try to make sure that to manufacture chaos, as Dr. Richardson said, and we just have to be smart enough to not to fall for that okie doke. The reality is that Jerry Blackwell did an amazing job prosecuting Derek Chauvin, and that brother got state time waiting for him if he gets a federal pardon. And the only way that that's going to change is if Governor Walz offers him a pardon. And I'm not a gambling man, but I'd put money on the fact that after we redesign the pardons process, that Governor Walz ain't going to do that.
Your second point, hold on there for a second. I heard some reaction over here.
Well, yeah, I love this question. Why do we think we did it? I think we're clear. They wanted to create the chaos. They wanted us back in the streets, and therefore you could probably have like martial law or something of that nature. It was an effort to goad us into going out into the streets. And I actually have people who were signing a letter, because we do have to say something. I want to say something about what Justin said. It's great that we had A.G. Ellison. So you asked about some of the work that I do. One is the things I do, and Ruth can attest to this, is I work to make sure we get people who are elected that reflect us and that hold our values. So we have to go back a step, because if there was no A.G. Ellison, and remember they came against him, and the DFL party actually at some point abandoned him when it didn't look good for them. If we had not come together and elected an AG who would prosecute a Chauvin, imagine what it would look like now. So we have to use I'm big into civic engagement.
And no, the backstory there is that the Hennepin County prosecutor had a history of not prosecuting.
Absolutely.
Talk about that, because that validates the point you're making.
Because there was a history of those people, like you said it, of not being prosecuted. So if this had followed that pattern, Chauvin and the others would have gone free. Mm-hmm. But luckily we had an AG that stepped in, and we actually, he didn't just step in. There was a push from the people to say, we want this case to go to the Attorney General. So when you talk about how we have power, that's the power. And you asked the question to Mr. Barry here, how do we have change? That's how we change things. So we made a push as a people that this case should go to the AG, because we couldn't trust Hennepin County to do it, the attorney to do it. And as a result, Chauvin was convicted, because prior to that, no one had been convicted but a Black man who killed a white woman when he was a police officer. But go ahead.
And that's interesting. I was talking to Deacon Charlie, I think, on the way home yesterday. Who's one of the deacons here who is supporting this broadcast, about the sequence of compensations to victims of crime. And I was recalling that when Jamar Clark's family experienced the death of a loved one, and when Fernando Castillo's family experienced that, the settlements probably were in the, first of all, less than $1 million range, and the second one, $2 to $3 million. But when Christine Diamond, is that the right name? Diamond? Justine Diamond was killed by a uniformed Black officer, that settlement resulted in a $20 million settlement.
Yes.
As it turns out, then the expectations of our community shifted as well. And that's why the George Floyd family experienced a plus $20 million. But more than that, it's not the money. The precedent is about beginning to value Black lives and making sure that when our public costs, at some point in time, your ability, your willingness to dismiss. Go ahead. Well, talk about it.
Because I see it different. I don't see it as shock. I'm looking at Tyree Nichols inside of Memphis, and I'm seeing them not prosecute him. And I see the federal database of officers who have violated citizens' rights. So sometimes, it's like I'm gonna feint you with the left and hit you with the right. So they got us thinking about Derek Chauvin, which they know that it's an ironclad situation, but they're going around the country and they're not charging folks. As a matter of fact, yesterday, they just gave $5 million. The Trump administration just gave $5 million for one of the women who was shot because she was trying to break into the congressional offices right there on January 6th. Now, with everyone else inside of our community, they're saying that we're lawlessness, right? But then when the police and the Republicans say they back the blue, but when the police officers had to shoot this woman because she was coming to cause harm to them, he put on his social media platform yesterday that the police officers was lawless. Now, I just want people to understand the difference, because we keep on saying, and this is what, 5 years later, he was the president 5 years ago. So this shows you that this is a change that people are trying to walk things back. And that's why the dangers of all of those promises that were given to our community, from the corporate side as well as to the laws, we have to make sure people own up to those promises. And we have to make sure inside of our community, you talk about change, we have to cash those things in when we do get the change. We cannot squander off those things. We have to hold ourselves accountable. We can't waste it as a community, because what happens anytime we squander the riches that's given to us, they're going to say that, hey, this is why we didn't give it to them in the first place, because we knew they were going to do this.
Haley, go ahead, Alberta.
I was going to say, well, the walking back part. If you look at our history, them walking back is not anything new.
No.
Listen, after the Civil War, Reconstruction was it was a high time for the people of color. We were electing, senators, and we had towns that were bustling and growing. And what happened? They walked that back. There needs to be Jim Crow. I'm from Mississippi. I know you know.
That's right. That's right.
So they walked that back. And so every time we take 2 steps forward, they want to make us take 3 steps back. This is the history of this nation. We can never let up. We can never step back. We have to keep moving forward, because we know they may be on a high and we want to do all of these things for the Black community. But we've seen, once again, that sentiment change, right? We knew that this was coming. Black people aren't as upset as people. We're not shocked. We might be upset, but we're not shocked that this is how people are now thinking. But it's incumbent upon us to stay ready. It's to stay engaged, right? And that's the thing. We can never let up. We have to stay engaged. We have to hold people accountable.
It's almost like y'all are reading from my notes, because I have some notes here. And but I'm an attorney, and so as you guys are talking, I'm just kind of seeing this from like what you guys are talking about as well, this legal aspect of progress and kind of what that looks like, and the rollbacks that we've seen, and kind of how, especially with social media and being Gen Z, I feel like we see how this kind of like cancel culture, if you will, it kind of makes it like fast paced and there's a short memory. And so I echo that. And what I want to add to that is we have seen kind of what Justin was talking about earlier. We have seen progress. But I think kind of echoing and grasping what you guys are saying is, if you let up, they will roll back. And so to kind of cash that out, hold them accountable, because we've seen these decrees. For example, I have this note to mention, there are these decrees both with the Minneapolis Police Department, state and federal. But with this administration, not my administration, with this administration, President Trump has specifically said he's considering undoing the federal decree. So what I also want to echo that I heard mentioned was the importance of not just federal engagement and voting for the president, but local voting, local engagement, because there is still that state decree. There is still Governor Walz, who we elected. And so it's not, there is, still Attorney General Ellison, who we elected. This is not a dictatorship. So there is a lot of opportunity for engagement and a lot of opportunity for still that accountability and making sure we cash those things things out, and that when we do take 2 steps forward, it's not 3 steps back, because there are a lot of means and opportunities for engagement on all levels of government. And of course, that still means that there needs to be federal support. That does not mean you stop and accept, but that does mean that you capitalize on what is available. And for this situation, the state decree is not likely to be rolled back with Governor Walz, and making sure that as this governor election comes up, you turn out and you vote. Just because a presidential election is not on the ballot does not mean you don't turn out and vote. And so for me, like, and same with like the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, we see how that's been in the legislative rooms several sessions now, and it keeps dying and dying and dying. And so that engagement is not the president. That's voting for your elected officials in Congress. That's Senate. That's the House of Reps. That's not the president. And of course you vote for president. Of course you speak out on that. But there are so many different levels of government, and this racism, this murder, this violence is something that Gen Z is very familiar with. We grew up with school shootings. We grew up with out of control gun laws. We grew up being, walking to school and might not walking home that evening. These are things that we grew up with, on top of the racism that we've seen for hundreds of years that this country was built on. And I think that as a generation, we're very aware of this. But also as a Black woman, not only did my grandfather die from gun violence, but we also see Black women dying from gun violence too. This is a community effort. This is a community effort on all levels of government. And so I just, like I said, felt like you guys were reading my notes as you're talking, because as an attorney, I was thinking from this legal mindset, and I'm hearing you guys saying you need to cash this out. We cannot let them roll this back. That is also a legal process too. And that's something that requires engagement before 18, to my generation, but all the way through this intergenerational connectedness of staying engaged on all levels of government. The president, but also Attorney General Ellison, also the governor, also your House of Reps, also your senators, also your mayor, anything.
And I want to jump in on this really quickly, because there's something Thomas said that I think is really important, because when we think about the gaps of what didn't happen, and the economic inequity was never addressed.
Yes.
And when we look at the research, including the research from Citi that came out in 2020 after George Floyd was murdered, where they looked over the past 20 years and saw that racism against Black Americans, just Black Americans, cost our U.S. economy more than $16 trillion. And so it's that understanding that racism is not only harmful for the people who experience it, it's harmful for everyone.
And it's not isolated.
And
Can I
let me
go ahead? I just want to jump off on your finish your point.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, but I just want to say that has been the gap. Federally and locally, there hasn't been a movement to really address that disparity. And I would encourage people to look at that report that came from the House Select Committee on Racial Justice, because there is an economist-inspired bill that would begin to really address the economic inequity.
I think like you speak to some of that I think Thomas speaks to really well. It's just that, and someone brought it up earlier, this concept of liberation. And something that when I was an organizer, we used to say all the time is like, I can't get free until you get free, right? And we can name multiple, none of us are free, right? And then how that translates to policy is that what's good for Black folks is good for everybody.
That part.
And then what happens, right, Thomas, is that everybody shows up and gets the benefits, and somehow the conditions in our community never change. And and we have to get more specific around asking some of the folks, because I'm all for voting for all the people that you just identified. Vote every election, vote early, vote often. But what I get frustrated is with we have all these politicians talking about racial equity, and we can't name one thing that they've actually done for Black folks. And then you have the one that has done stuff for Black folks, like Bobby Joe Champion, who has continued, love him or hate him, the brother has receipts. And then he gets thrown under the bus, and you got Black folks jumping on top of him. And I'm like, that makes no sense to me. At the end of the day, like, we need to understand one thing about liberation. Liberation is not about freeing someone else. It is about the fact that, like, I can't get free. My skin in the game is
we got 1
required.
minute. Wayne, bring some music up. Alberta, there's an event you're going to do this weekend.
Yes.
Got a minute. Got a
I
minute.
do. So for those of you who know of Rise and Remember, there's a group of us, mothers of professional basketball players with the National Basketball Players Retired League. We're going to have a unity walk. You've been out in these streets. I'm asking you to come out on May 24th at 10 a.m. in these streets and show solidarity. It is time for us to go back outside, people. It's time for us to get off the bench. So please join us May 24th, 10 o'clock, right actually here. We'll be kicking it off.
Thank you all. Thank you, my panel. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Wayne. I want you to join us here tomorrow, 1 o'clock. We'll continue live from George Floyd Square. I'm Al McFarland. Take care.